When I was 19, I was at a point in my life where I was constantly searching for connection. My self-esteem was low, and I felt that dating apps could fill that void. I signed up for several apps, and one day I got a message on OkCupid from a guy named Brent. He seemed interesting. We shared hobbies like video games and other nerdy interests, and he seemed friendly enough. Looking at his pictures, I felt like I had seen him before, but I couldn't figure out where. I shrugged it off, assuming we might have just crossed paths in our small city. After chatting for a bit, we agreed to go on a date. He suggested Red Lobster, which seemed fine for two broke college kids trying to have a decent first date. On the day of the date, I spent some time making sure I looked good, but not overdone. I was nervous but excited to meet him. When Brent arrived, my excitement immediately took a hit. He looked nothing like his pictures. His clothes were dirty, and he didn't seem to have made any effort to groom himself. I told myself not to judge too quickly. Maybe he had a rough day, maybe there was a good explanation. I decided to give him a chance, but things didn't get better. As we looked at the menu, I decided to order chicken. I've never been a fan of seafood, and I figured it wouldn't matter, but apparently it mattered a lot to Brent. When I placed my order, he rolled his eyes and loudly expressed his frustration. He couldn't believe I would order chicken at a seafood restaurant. I tried to explain that I didn't like seafood, but he kept pushing. The conversation became tense, and I felt embarrassed by how much attention he was drawing to us. After that, the mood of the date was ruined. We sat through an awkward meal, barely talking. I assumed that he was as turned off by the whole thing as I was. I couldn't wait for it to end, and I figured we'd part ways without any interest in seeing each other again. But I was wrong. When the date ended, he insisted on walking me back to my car. Suddenly, his demeanor changed. He became overly affectionate, finding excuses to touch my arm or shoulder. It felt uncomfortable and forced. Then, he started leaning in, trying to kiss me. I managed to avoid his advances, mumbling excuses about needing to get home. After a long, awkward goodbye, I finally got in my car and drove away, relieved it was over. When I got home, my phone buzzed with a string of texts from Brent. At first, I assumed he was upset about the date, or still annoyed about the chicken. But when I opened the messages, I was shocked. His texts were a passionate outpouring of feelings. He wrote about how perfect we were for each other, and how he couldn't wait to see me again. It was unsettling, considering how poorly the date had gone. I didn't reply. Instead, I went to bed, planning to talk to my roommate in the morning about what to do. When I told her, she immediately said I should block him. But I hesitated. Blocking him felt harsh, and I didn't want to seem mean. I decided to ignore him for now, hoping he'd lose interest. Over the next few days, Brent kept texting. He didn't just express feelings. He tried to rationalize why we were meant to be together. He mentioned a quiz from the dating app that had shown we were a high match percentage and said it was proof we were statistically perfect for each other. I tried to let him down gently, but he brushed it off. He insisted I'd see things his way eventually. I should have blocked him then, but I didn't. I was too much of a pushover. Then one evening, I got a message that made my stomach drop. Brent texted me saying he was outside. A moment later, I heard knocking on my bedroom window. Panic surged through me. How did he know where I lived? I texted him back, demanding to know what he was doing. That's when he casually revealed that he worked at my apartment complex, doing maintenance and janitorial work. He'd recognized me when he messaged me on the app and had already decided we were meant to be together. It hit me then. Brent had been stalking me even before our date. My mind raced. I felt trapped, knowing he had access to the building and might have been watching me for weeks. I sent him a furious message, making it clear that I wanted nothing to do with him. I threatened to take action if he didn't leave me alone. But he didn't take me seriously. He said I was being silly and stubborn, insisting I'd come around eventually. It was as if he believed our relationship was as undeniable as gravity. Finally, I blocked his number. But that didn't stop him. He started coming to my window more often, knocking and waiting for me to respond. It was terrifying. I didn't feel safe in my own home. At this point, I knew I needed help. I contacted my landlord, explaining the situation. Thankfully, they took it seriously. They spoke to Brent and warned him to stay away from me. His visits stopped after that, though I still felt uneasy knowing he worked so close to where I lived. Not long after, I decided to move. I packed up my things and left that apartment complex behind. The experience shook me, but I was determined to put it in the past. Over 10 years have passed since then, and I've never heard from Brent again. I can only hope he's moved on and isn't doing this to anyone else.
A year ago, something happened that still gives me chills. At the time, I was 15, living in a rural area where houses were spaced far apart. You could see your neighbors' houses, but walking to them would take a few minutes. Around that time, a new family had moved into the house next to ours, and although we didn't know them well, we had noticed a new camper parked in their front yard. It wasn't unusual. Many people in our area had campers on their property, but this house already had quite a few. My dad later learned from the owner that one of his sons, likely in his late 20s or early 30s, had moved in. Earlier that week, we discovered that someone had tried to break into the Connex box we had in our yard. It looked like a crowbar had been used. No one had seen anything, and at the time we didn't have security cameras, so we wrote it off as kids being dumb and trying to steal stuff. Then, a few days later, something even stranger happened. My mom went to let our dog inside, but realized he was gone. We had a dog run through our garage with a fenced yard area to keep him contained. At first, we thought he might have somehow escaped, though it seemed impossible given that the fence was over 7 feet tall and he was barely a foot high. We eventually found him down the hill, looking just as confused as we were. But when we returned, we noticed the gate to the fenced area was open. The padlock, which had been locked shut, was cracked open as if someone had smashed it with a rock. It was clear that someone had let him out. Concerned, my mom ordered some security cameras. That Friday, my friend and I went to see a movie. She drove since I didn't have my license yet. After she dropped me off, I went to open the garage door, as I usually did, by typing in the passcode. But that night, the code didn't work. I tried again, but still nothing. Feeling uneasy in the dark, I called my mom. She assured me that the code hadn't been changed and said she and my dad were on their way home, but it would take them about 30 minutes to get there. As we talked, a car pulled into our driveway. Relieved, I laughed and asked her to open the garage with the remote she had in her car, but her tone suddenly turned serious. "What do you mean?" she asked. "We're not home yet." At that moment, I froze. The car's headlights were on, and it was slowly moving toward me. "Mom, who is this?" I whispered, trying to stay calm. The car didn't park or speed up. It just crept forward, inching closer. I tried the garage code one last time, but it still didn't work. My heart raced as I realized I had no way into the house and no safe place to go. Desperately, I scanned my surroundings. Running to a neighbor's house wasn't an option. They were too far away, and the car would easily catch up to me. Then I remembered my dad's truck parked in the driveway. I bolted for it, praying it was unlocked. Miraculously, it was. I jumped in, locked the doors, and ducked down. My mom was still on the phone, panicking as I explained what was happening. I told her I needed to hang up and called my friend instead, begging her to come back and get me. Thankfully, she agreed. While I waited, the car in my driveway reversed. It didn't turn around or loop through. It just reversed straight back until it parked in the neighbor's lot across from our house, facing me. When my friend's car finally pulled into the driveway, I didn't waste a second. I ran out of the truck and into her car. We sped off, making sure no one was following us. I stayed at her house that night, too scared to go back home. The next day, we installed the security cameras. Not long after, we heard that the neighbor's son was forced to move out. Since then, nothing strange has happened. Maybe it wasn't him and all the incidents were just a bizarre coincidence, but I can't shake the feeling that they were connected. Whoever it was, I'm just grateful they never came back. This story felt like it was straight out of a horror movie. I'm sharing it here to seek closure and perhaps some answers. The police have been informed since this incident, and they asked me why I didn't call them as it was happening. Honestly, I was too terrified to think straight. It happened one evening when my friend and I decided to park near a lake in our city. The lake is surrounded by dense trees and various car parks. The closer you are to the water, the further you are from the main road that leads out of the wooded area. We had parked about 5 meters from the lake, with the car facing the water. We were just sitting there, listening to music and chatting. I was in the driver's seat, but the car's ignition was off. About 10 minutes in, my friend, who was staring out of my driver's side window, suddenly asked, "Is that a man standing there?" I laughed, thinking he was joking, and looked straight ahead. All I could see was the dark lake in front of us. "No," I replied, brushing it off. But he kept pointing at my window insistently. That's when I turned my head to look, and my heart nearly stopped. About 10 meters away, there was a man standing perfectly still, wearing what appeared to be a mask, a cat mask, or something similar that covered the top half of his face. He was staring directly at us, completely unmoving. The sight was so unnerving that a wave of dread washed over me. Without wasting a second, I reached for the car keys and started the engine as fast as I could. As soon as the car roared to life, the man began sprinting toward my driver's side door at full speed. My hands trembled, but I was grateful I had locked the doors. He didn't stand a chance of getting in, but the panic skyrocketed when I noticed a white Ute pickup truck suddenly pull out from the shadows and begin following my car. We were in a wooded area with dirt roads and multiple turns, none of which I was familiar with. Each turn I made, the Ute stayed right on my tail. My friend and I were screaming, unsure of what they wanted or what was happening. I kept making turns, hoping to lose them, but it felt like we were going deeper into the maze of dirt roads. Then, the worst thing imaginable happened. I made a wrong turn and ended up in a dead-end car park. The Ute quickly parked at an angle, effectively blocking us in. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. That's when the masked man appeared again, emerging from the forest. He was coming at my car fast, his intentions unclear but undoubtedly sinister. I slammed the gear shift into reverse, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I nearly hit him as I maneuvered around the angled Ute, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out of there. Somehow, by sheer luck or adrenaline-fueled determination, I managed to squeeze past the Ute and drive away. This time, I found the right road that led us out of the wooded area and onto the main road. Even after we were safely back on a well-lit street, my body wouldn't stop trembling. My friend and I replayed the events in our heads, trying to make sense of what had just happened. What were they trying to do? What did they want? It felt like more than just a prank, especially considering the pursuit and their attempt to trap us in that dead end. Looking back, I've considered a few possibilities. Was it an attempted carjacking? If so, why go through such an elaborate and terrifying ordeal? Wouldn't there have been simpler ways to steal a car? Or was it something even darker, something we're lucky to have escaped from? I'll never know for sure what their intentions were, but the thought of it still sends chills down my spine.